Hello, everyone, and welcome to Free Thought Blog's Conscience 3. It is 10 a.m. Saturday, January 24th, and we are about to have the Psychology of Trolls panel. Now, much has been made recently of trolling, of sadism, psychopathy, and I put together a panel of our experts within their fields to discuss the nexus of trolling and the dark tetrad of personality. So let's start off with some introductions. We'll start with Miri, just because I'm going left to right on my Hangouts list. We'll start with Miri. Tell us about yourself, Miri.
Hi, so my name is Miri. I write the blog Brute Reason on the Free Thought Blogs Network. I did my undergrad in psychology and am now studying social work, so with plans to become a therapist. So I'm far from an expert in this, but I do have the background to sort of understand psychological research, and also, I hope, a little bit to understand people, whether they're doing things we like or things we maybe don't like.
And Stephanie.
I also have a degree in psychology, although I really have not used it in, we won't talk about how long. And I have been dealing with and working to come up with effective strategies for dealing with trolls online for at least the last 5 years.
Tauriq.
What?
Really? Tauriq, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
I have no idea why I was asked to be on here, but apparently I've done some sort of writing against online trolls and harassment, and have upset many people. And I'm trying to find effective ways. Most of my work is about trying to mitigate areas of insecurity and make the web a better, safer place for everyone, and also, of course, to spread the message of hating men thoroughly.
Of course, Ms. Andre. So you're eminently qualified, despite your inability to articulate such. But, Valerie, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Valerie Aurora. I'm the executive director of the ADA initiative. Our goal is to support women in open technology and culture, which involves one of the great barriers to being involved in open technology and culture, which occurs on the internet to a great deal, is online harassment. So I try to keep abreast of all of the latest troll research, and also have read this awesome paper about the dark tetrad and trolling. So that's it.
Excellent. I'm Jason Thibeault. I blog at freethoughtblogs.com/LousyCanuck. I put the panel together because I am very interested in this topic. I have no personal, I guess, expertise in this field myself, but I have been blogging for long enough to have seen many, many, many trolls. And I will be taking questions for this panel in the chat room, the Feringula chat room, which is a moderated chat room and has its own harassment policy. It is accessible at tinyurl.com/FtBCon. By all means, jump in if you'd like to ask questions. So I guess we'll just start it off with the big question on the table is whether or not there's anything to the study that has been passed around about the sociopathy of trolls. I know that Miri has done the research, done the homework, so go right ahead.
So the study actually deals with 4 personality traits that, as Jason mentioned, are known as the dark tetrad, and they are narcissism, Machiavellianism, psychopathy, and sadism. So, that all sounds really wonderful. The only one of those that people might not be familiar with is Machiavellianism, which is basically just the idea that the ends justify the means. So the important thing to note is that there is such a thing as narcissistic personality disorder and then psychopathy as a diagnosis. But that's not what's being assessed here, because only, you know, a mental health professional working directly with a person has the authority to make such a diagnosis. However, they are personality traits that are sort of like a spectrum. You could be, you know, high on it, you could be low on it, you could be about average narcissism. So they, in order to assess people's level of these traits, they asked them, they gave them several scales that were designed to assess them. And some of the questions, you know, it asked like, to what degree you agree with this. Some of them are actually pretty creepy, such as one of the questions for psychopathy was, payback needs to be quick and nasty. If you endorse the statement strongly, you are more likely to be high on psychopathic traits. So and then they also asked the participants what their favorite activity was online to do. And I think there was like debating issues, chatting, and then there was trolling, sort of self-reported, I like trolling. So not surprisingly, the people who chose that trolling was their favorite were much, much, much higher than everyone else on all of these traits. So that's sort of like the overview of the study.
Okay, so we have an idea of what the study actually says. How does that map to your personal experience?
For me, I mean, I think it does, because while it can be difficult to assess someone's personality when, you know, all they're doing is calling you a nasty cunt or whatever it is, there is this sense of like, so the narcissism, they seem to sort of think that the world revolves around them, that their opinions are the most important, that anyone who refuses to listen to them is doing them this great, great, great disservice, which is sort of what you see with people who are diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. And then sadism, I think, should be obvious. Like, they do it because they like causing pain. You know, that's sort of all there is to that. Machiavellianism is kind of hard to assess sometimes, but I do get the sense, especially in the social justice sort of world, that, especially with Gamergate now, sort of bringing this into the open, they feel that social justice is such a menace that it is okay, even an ethical obligation, to do anything that will end this menace. They sort of have this narrative, like it reminded me of like Battlestar Galactica, when they're like, yes, this is a horrible thing to do, but we must keep the species going. They sort of really have this like ends justify the means mentality sometimes. What do others think?
Yeah, that definitely matches my experience. Although I will say that you know, when we talk about trolls, we're not always really specific about what we're talking about. We're talking about anything from what Tauriq does to, which is basically getting out there and saying things that he doesn't mean, and kind of, I won't say playing devil's advocate, because he's really not trying to advocate for these positions, but
it's more
throwing
like parody.
Yeah, like parody. Throwing out statements that are really definitely insincere and but still there to get some kind of reaction. So trolling in the sense of throwing a line into the water and seeing what you come back with, to the Billy Goat Gruff kind of troll. The troll under the bridge who says, "You shall not pass. I will stop you. You're not going to get past me. You're not going to be able to do whatever it is you're trying to do." And I think that's really what we're talking about in terms of these kind of personality traits. I don't think Tauriq is particularly narcissistic, but I mean, I could be wrong. I'm not qualified. I haven't given him any scales. But yeah, the people who have decided that this is a tactic, that this is an acceptable tactic for what they want to do. You know, it's hard to say that people who decide to do this have not decided that the ends justify the means. So yeah, it definitely fits in my experience.
So somebody in the IRC chat room is already mentioning the fact that you are wearing a Freeze Peach pendant, Stephanie. And
yes.
that is a bit of a meme that has come into play when fighting with trolls who mistake free speech for freedom to use anybody's platform however you want, to shit it up however you want.
And this, I think, really...
swearing is okay, so...
Okay. This, I think, really ties into that narcissism. You know, not only do you have the right to say something, but you have the right to use spaces that I have built over years to do that. Spaces that are meant for completely different things. You have the right to do that. You don't. That's not free speech. That's barging in and deciding that the entire world is yours. And yeah, that's pretty narcissistic.
I think what Stephanie said about being specific with what we're talking about when we talk about trolling is really important because people get really confused. There are a lot of things that are labeled as trolling, which is really just harassment and abuse. But I don't think that all trolling is harassment and abuse necessarily. So for instance, my little brother plays a lot of games online, and sometimes on his channel someone will comment like, "You're dumb, go away." So that's sort of like the typical trolling, and that can be like hurtful and uncomfortable, but in my experience that doesn't, like, that's not what ultimately pushes people away from the internet and all public life, really. That what does that is the more like sustained, like coming from multiple sources, targeted campaign of harassment and abuse. So one of the weaknesses in this study is that for that part it just asked which of these is your favorite online activity, and one of the options was trolling. So we don't actually know what we're getting here. Like, this could be a bunch of 13-year-old kids who like posting like, "LOL, you're dumb," on each other's pages, or it could be some of the people who are targeting us, on Twitter, on blogs, on wherever, and we don't really know. And we don't know what sort of personality differences they might have.
Speaking of that, last night we did a panel on asexual spectrum atheists. One of our former Free Thought Blogs bloggers, if you could call him that, was Thunderfoot. He tweeted a link to this YouTube video saying that it was the nightmarish intersection of FTB and Tumblr culture, and that immediately spawned a number of, I guess, crap comments in the comments. I had to immediately turn off comments to prevent that nonsense from happening, so I am obviously abrogating free speech. Valerie, I know that you have a good deal of experience with strategies for dealing with harassment, and I'd love to get you talking about that, especially with respect to what you've noticed as far as trends for how trolls tend to attack people.
Sure. Yeah. I think when talking about the subject, you have to start out from the beginning by saying no victim blaming. Like, nothing you do cause you to deserve any response, right? And I also have another interesting perspective on this in that while I'm very familiar with online trolling, I also am a woman who walks on the street in San Francisco, and I've had several highly hilarious experiences lately where it feels like I'm having a conversation with an internet troll in real life. Like, they're doing all of the exact techniques and arguments that I get online, and because I've seen them online, I just laugh because it's obviously not it's not working on me. I was a couple of years ago the subject of an online harassment and trolling campaign with Weave involved. So I have some experience with being the target of these things. The thing that I have gotten from all of these experiences is that I thought it was interesting when Stephanie was talking about the means justify the end, and I think that often we think there's an end that is related to something like destroying feminism or ending atheism, or that there's actually a higher philosophical goal, and really it's about that. Coming back to the sadism, that like seeing you suffer is the end goal, and so from that point of view, I personally in my life try to make it less rewarding for trolls to attack me. So I have one of the things I did, which I don't recommend for everyone, and it's definitely a thing I can do because I come from a place of privilege. I wrote a blog post that I was basically self-doxing myself, that I took all of the things that people have tried to use against me, and and put them in a blog post with instructions on how to use them best, right? So I have unsavory family members who have Wikipedia pages. We've tried to use that against me as though like I somehow the sins of my parents were to be visited against on me. And I thought it was hilarious at the time because I actually want people to know more about them. But writing this blog post really was just like, okay, don't even bother. I am proud of this. It's out there. I would, and of course the blog post is like, yes, please go for it. Please tell more people about my family. So that was, another interesting thing in terms of techniques, again, this is not a thing that everyone can do, but I think is really revealing and helps you understand the psychology of trolls is we decided a long time ago with the ADA initiative to use my home address as the public address for the ADA initiative. It's on our website. It's what all of the government documents say. As a result, I have never been harassed in the form of people posting my address online because it's already there. And that really made me understand, and I don't get packages or anything like that either. That made me understand that a high element of trolling, which I don't think is covered in the Dark Tetrad study, and I would love to hear the rest of you talk about, is showing off to other people. You can't show off that you found my home address if it's already online. It's like, I went to their website and copied and pasted this. Of course, the reality of finding someone's home address is so prosaic. It's like $25 in 30 seconds, right? But it's because it's transgressing a boundary. It's much more attractive, and you can brag. So I self-doxed on that as well, sort of intentionally, but now I'm calling it that. So I'll stop talking now. But anyone else want to talk about like the reward, the payoff, showing off to other trolls?
I need to bring Tauriq in on this because as amazingly funny of a guy as I think he is, I know exactly that he's doing just that, and he's generally keeping it to people that he knows will take it as such. But Tauriq, you've been charged a number of times of being our resident troll. How would you like to answer those charges?
With great surprise. Well, primarily, I found it as a very strange sort of subversive form of solidarity. The ability to tap into the obvious satire of very foolish people, and to speak in such an obviously garbled nonsense way that reveals the stupidity of their claims and the bigotry as well, and allows the usual targets to sort of kick that idea around, and to kick that satire around, which in actual fact is the real idea that these people hold. It doesn't seem it's very easy for me to do that because I encounter it so much, and it's so obvious and it's so boring, the same kinds of arguments that occur. But primarily it was really done. It was only done between, as you indicated, between people I knew, because they've indicated that it does sort of help because they realize that it's really dumb. The idea is, even if the intentions and the eventual results are kind of horrible and awful. But there was a I can't remember which thing it was that I wrote about recently, but one of the issues that especially that hashtag raised was people's responses was, this really doesn't matter. These arguments are so stupid, they couldn't possibly work out, but whether we think these people's claims are irrelevant and foolish and babyish, the impact is the important focus. And the impact here has been that, yes, obviously there's no wild sort of conspiracies and game journalism or whatever it is that they've decided to pick up on, but the effects of that need to believe, that passion, that sort of narcissism that we've all spoken about, is having tangible impacts in terms of swatting and people being chased out their homes. So there's this weird disconnect between what they're saying and the reasons for their actions and the results of the actions themselves. And the problem is that we're reacting to this part, but at the same time, we kind of can't ignore this thing. And while we're treating this seriously, it seems like we're giving sort of a platform to their other claims, which we know aren't true. if that makes any sense.
So basically, as a result of focusing on the fact that they are spending most of their time harassing women and indie game developers in the community, we are ignoring the actual ethical questions regarding big game designers being in bed with journalists.
Yeah, exactly. It's all these issues are actual. In some of these cases, they're actual issues. There are massive media problems when it comes to game journalism ethics, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but there are issues. It's such a boring topic. I can't tell you how boring it is. Like, it's really not interesting. The issues that are of concern, yeah, there's reasons we should be concerned, but it does not warrant the response that's occurring here. Neither do any of the things that have happened to any of the marginalized people or anybody that's been doxxed and harassed and been chased out there. I've seen no reason at all to support those ends, and that's of great concern.
The interesting thing about that whole Gamergate thing, and I kind of want to diverge into this just briefly because we were going to try to have a Gamergate panel, and that didn't quite pan out, didn't get enough people to do it. But one very interesting thing about this is the fact that it's effectively drawn in tribalistic lines. The people who are being targeted for supposed ethical violations didn't do the things that they were supposed to have done. There was no, for instance, sleeping with a journalist to get good reviews for Depression Quest by Zoe Quinn, since, no reviews ever happened, for instance. And people like Total Biscuit, who have been very entrenched on the Gamergate side, reviewed a game that he actually provided voice acting for and gave it a positive review. And one would think that that's a little bit more of a flagrant ethical violation than just being a feminist and saying, hey, there are some aspects of this game that are potentially problematic. So, I don't know. You guys want to...
Yeah, and it all ends up making a lot more sense if you go back to what Valerie said about this being a social process. Because none of the reasons behind Gamergate make sense. Pretty much none of the reasons behind the atheist trolling that we've received make any sense. But if you look at it, you'll see that it's the same people. You will see an awful lot of social activity going on around this. You will see a lot of that, people congratulating each other and themselves, particularly themselves, when they do something, generally something ridiculous. But what we find is a group of people who seem to have discovered that the only thing they really have in common with other people is that they can give people crap on the internet. And that, this is fun to them, and that they're starting to socialize around it. And, while social media has been great for an awful lot of things, the fact that people are organizing around doing that is behind an awful lot of the problems that we have. Because
So
face
basically
it,
we're seeing
being
the same
social.
roles.
Oh, yeah, we're definitely seeing the same rogues. It is not a coincidence that Thunderfoot is everywhere in all of this.
Mm-hmm.
This is where he gets his adulation and money these days. Jay Allen, a man in black on Twitter, has done a great job of documenting some of that for Boing Boing recently. But yeah, this is the social approval that these people get. And they get it from other people trolling with them.
And now they're getting it in pecuniary form as well. They're utilizing their assets to actually start literally making a living, as Jay pointed out in those articles. So we're giving them platforms, and they're using platforms, and they're making a life out of this in all sorts of ways, and that's incredibly troubling. And one of those platforms where it occurs is comment sections. And I just want to briefly mention this because I think you all know my views about comment sections, because they are the bane of my existence, and I wish nothing but death upon them. main thing is I think comment sections should be exceptions, not rules. And I think that if you're going to have them, by definition, they should be moderated. And which comes into what was mentioned very earlier, which is the narcissism part. You moderate a comment section or you close a comment section, and the first result we get is cries of free speech. And that just is sort of everything about that.
Yeah, there's that, to circle back around to the free speech, that meme wherein trolls mistake freedom to speak for freedom to someone else's platform. And I think closing comment sections, there was the study in Science, was it Science Daily? I forget. There was the study very recently that suggested that having comment sections open actually detracts from people's understanding of the article in question. And with respect to, important scientific information, there is no, I guess, imperative to allow people to comment freely about things that they're ignorant of. The global warming trolls will regularly get in and paste their same 8 links to their same discredited 2004 study everywhere that global warming is mentioned. And heavens forfend that you mention feminism anywhere on the internet, lest everything go to crap from there. Do you guys want to talk about that at all?
I have a comment. The thing that I've come to realize, I think, especially from my in-person experience of harassment, is that most people doing, I'm sure there are people who believe in whatever it is their original goal was, but most of the people doing this form of harassment do not actually hold the opinions that they're expressing, or maybe they don't mind them. But so my most recent shouting at somebody on the street experience, it was hilarious because he just kept going down this list of things that he thought might trigger me, something anti-Semitic, and that wouldn't work. So he called me something something homophobic, right? Then he makes some reference to class, like you went to a high-end university, you named a specific university. It was hilarious. That didn't work, and he just went through this list, right? And I started making a list of disgusting social opinions he had expressed and repeating them, and then he would add a new one each time. And I finally realized that, yeah, he probably doesn't care at all about, the goal of eliminating anyone of a particular religion from the earth or any of these other things. And I think that also really came home to me with the recent harassment of people speaking up against Linus Torvalds' abusiveness. Those people were not hanging out in Linux before. Linux had plenty of terrible people who were obnoxious and unpleasant to be around. But they weren't doing the doxing. It was just a bunch of other people who decided to show up and defend Linus Torvalds' right to be an asshole. And I think that is actually the common theme between all of these people is they just want to hurt other people. And I feel like taking their arguments seriously in any way, even to the point of bothering to discredit them, there's definitely a cost that happens with well-meaning people who are willing to go read that study, and they do need to be people do need to write rebuttals, but most of the time there's no point in taking these people seriously. And I think Tauriq's approach is actually the wisest thing to do because it conserves your emotional energy more. We as activists have the disadvantage if we are constantly requiring ourselves to be serious and to go and do the research and to respond substantively. You can also respond with one of my friends just replies to Gamergate trolls on Twitter with the words fart, 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 which of course infuriates them because you're not playing the game the right way. In the right way, you have to be serious and you have to be reasonable and intelligent and thoughtful, but they don't. They can be whatever they want to be. So I would love to take this back to the two people with psychology degrees because after I've been very interested in sociopathy in particular, and recently went and read a bunch of forums on psychforums.org, and kind of came away with wow, most sociopaths are extremely ineffective. Like, they don't know how to work with other people. They can't model other people's brains. They can't pretend. They can't pretend to pretend. They're like, why should I pretend? I don't get why people would pretend. They think the rest, some of them think the rest of us are pretending to love people. And they're like, why are you bothering? That doesn't get you any advantage. And I kind of came away with like, how do psychopaths even bother to get together on the internet and harm people? Like, they work in concert. Weave is pretty good at that. He's definitely a psychopath as far as I can tell, internet diagnosing. But if we're going with examples which confuse us, what's it like? What's the motivation?
One of the things you have to know about how sociopaths have generally been studied, or psychopaths, I should say. Sociopaths is an outdated term. It was not when I was in college, but take that out of my vocabulary. One of the things that you have to know about how they're studied is that they are frequently studied in prison, which means that people are studying the less effective psychopaths. So that's some of where your impression that these people are ineffective is going to come from. There are psychopaths who are generally pretty good at what they do. However, I would agree that they generally have flaws in their understanding of people that mean that they trip up, that they manage to screw things up in a big way. Weave is not the only person I've seen called a psychopath who has built up a big chunk of power, particularly social power, and then blown it by doing just really stupid things that indicate that he just doesn't really understand people. But the ones who are pretty competent frequently get to that point where they have some power because they're interested in it. They go about collecting it. That's the kind of thing that they might put some work and effort into. And so they end up with some measure of success. And so they frequently end up being kind of, and I'm speaking from experience largely, and just observing this rather than studies, because I'm not sure that social structures of trolling has been studied as much as it should be yet, although I expect many more studies in the next few years. They frequently end up being that point around which groups of less successful trolls coalesce. So you don't need a whole lot of them to be really successful to start and keep a community of trolling going.
Yeah, I was thinking about this earlier, actually, when we were talking about the social approval factor, and I think a lot of group behaviors come down more to that than to the specific beliefs that people have. So I'm going to make a very loose analogy to religion here. A lot of people argue against religion by arguing against the actual religious principles, or well, this is obviously wrong, but believing in God is stupid. But when you actually get to know a lot of religious people, you find that for them it's a lot more about the community, and the beliefs sort of follow. Or maybe they're there a little bit, but not all the way. Maybe they don't fully buy into it, but they really like the feeling that they have when they are in the religious community, engaging in these religious practices. So obviously, being religious and being a troll, not comparable, except in this idea of belonging to a community. So a lot of the people that you find who are trolling are very privileged in a lot of ways, but they don't feel like it. Maybe because they were bullied in school, or they don't have a lot of friends, or maybe they do have friends, but they just feel like, oh, I'm into this nerdy stuff and nobody gets it, or I want women to like me and they won't fuck me, or whatever it is, pardon my language. So, and they find in this community people who affirm their belief that they do deserve all of the things that they want, and that it's these other bitches who are not giving it to them. I mean, whatever it is, it doesn't have to be about women. So it becomes very self-reinforcing and very validating. So, a woman says something you don't like on the internet, you call her a slut. Someone writes an article about trolling, you comment saying you're a cunt. It becomes self-reinforcing.
Right. That gets back to what Stephanie was saying earlier about the fact that it doesn't really take much to get them to support one another over having done something particularly stupid. It's like it's its own goal. Just the fact of being able to outspend somebody else's resources when you disagree with them gives you a measure of power that you don't necessarily have if you can't actually out-argue them.
And I will say that in addition to what Tauriq does, there are other ways to make people look ridiculous when they're engaging in this kind of trolling. Some of which take a little more work, but particularly when you've run into somebody perhaps who has newly discovered trolling, or somebody who has built up that power before really becoming the heart of one of these communities, it can be worth it to do the work to show how ridiculous that person is, because when you have a community built around hero worshipping each other for really stupid things, kind of pointing out how stupid some of those things are can undercut some of the reward system there.
And that sort of makes me wonder if we might not be going about it the right way when we respond to trolling by sort of systematically disproving their points. And I know that I do this too, so I'm definitely speaking to myself here, because I just like that intellectual sort of activity. But if it's not so much about what they believe as the fact that they're deriving their own satisfaction from this activity, maybe we need to address that more so than well, actually, you're wrong that, women owe men sex or whatever it is.
Well, I kind of feel two minds on that. On the one hand, yes, we shouldn't take trolls' actual attempts at muddying the discourse too seriously. You're not really talking to them so much as the audience. And so I think if you leave these things on the table, they tend to hurt discourse later. But at the same time, I understand the need to try to attack the root of the problem as opposed to every instance of it. These are just symptoms. The fact that trolls are running around spouting nonsense is itself a symptom of the fact that these people legitimately do not believe in the argument and are legitimately closed to understanding the argument. Half of these trolls come in anytime they try to invade social justice discussions or feminist discussions or what have you. They come in looking like Steve Buscemi in High Fidelity? Is that it? No. Steve Buscemi with the skateboard over his shoulder saying, "Hello, fellow children." It's very patently obvious that this is not a child, and that this person is not a social justice warrior, as it were. But they're trying to invade the space just to, I guess, false flag, or there's no interest in actually understanding the argument that's being presented. They just want to hurt the discourse itself.
So, Jason, I have a really good reference for that. Charles' Rules of Argument. If you type Charles' Rules of Argument into the internet, you'll get the result. I think it shows an extremely good way of keeping in mind all of these factors. You still have an audience. You do need to address some kinds of arguments at some level, but it limits it all to something that's more sustainable. So the basic rules are don't argue on the internet. If you have to argue on the internet, state your position once, wait for a little bit, wait for people to come up with their obnoxious, trolly responses. Oh, you mean that everybody should be dead? Once you've got the collection of misunderstandings, which a reasonable person might read your statement and think, oh, atheists really do believe that all religious people should be killed. Then you do the response. It says, actually, no, I don't believe these things. And then you stop. You don't respond again. And especially, of course, if you have control over your comments section, you can disable or block them and all that sort of thing. And then I think the most important part of that set of rules is to go do something you enjoy, and that makes you feel good. Because like the whole point of this kind of nasty anti-social justice trolling is to wear us all down and to make us tired and to make us quit. So whenever you're doing things that make you feel good and give you energy, it's sort of the equivalent of what the trolls get out of hurting people, or let's call them the sadistic trolls. How's that? The sadistic trolls are getting out of hurting people. I have to credit Charles' Rules of Argument with saving so many individual people that I've worked with from burnout and from leaving the public arena. So.
Oh, I'm sorry. There's a comment from the question from the IRC channel. Valerie's earlier point about playing the game makes sense to me, and I now know better than to expect anyone else to take these kinds of campaigns seriously. But years back, following Watson's elevator anecdote, let's not rehash all of that, I learned a lot from engaging with people worked up about it, possibly some harassers, and it eventually made it clear to me how important many of the issues that motivate this conference are. Was I contributing to the problem? If so, and the panelists are verging on this already, how might I better follow such episodes in the future?
Tauriq obviously has something to say, but I wanted to just quickly say there are issues from which these sadistic trolls can draw power, because they are just broadly issues already in our society. Sometimes addressing that can help take away some of the power. But again, choose. Make decisions about what you want to do. You don't have to do everything.
So there was two things I wanted to mention. You can't hear the people outside, can you?
We can't really ignore them.
All right. So let me give an example of this that happened a few nights ago. I tweeted that it was a daily reminder that there were a bunch of that women had been chased out their homes because a club comprised of raging boners were very upset with them. Now, one thing I've learned about this movement is that they don't like to be insulted, and they were furious and whatever. But what happened was they started, the dog pile, which I'm sure all of you have experienced. The dog pile happens in your mentions. And so my defense of this is to firstly I check the person and I assess whether that person has, for example, a link back to their public profile. If there's like a link to their WordPress site and you can see their real name and so on, I try to not deal with those people. If it's sort of buttsex69 with an anime avatar, what I do is I deal with him publicly and make sure everybody sees who this person is. So I was doing that quite frequently, and somebody said, "Oh, look at you! You're doing this. You're doing a dot at mention, which is how you deal publicly on Twitter with these people." And that was really insulting them. Why are you making this public right now? Now, aside from the bizarre idea that suddenly I have to adhere to rules to people who called me a fat cunt, the weirdness was that there was this idea that I wasn't strong enough. There was this idea that you have to deal with this alone. You have to face this by yourself. And any sign of reaching out and showing others what you're dealing with is a sign of weakness. And essential to me is that what happens with dealing with these things publicly is that it provides a bridge for solidarity. Because what often happens is that they try and corner you. You end up fighting in a corner by yourself against a horde. But the horde doesn't see themselves sometimes as a horde because they just see themselves tweeting at this person. They forget the 300,000 other fools that are trying to stick their boners into your mentions. So instead, you're backed up. But if you make it public, you can sort of get solidarity from others, which I think is very, very important to help combat harassment. And we shouldn't feel ashamed at doing it. I think we need to be somewhat cautious of, for example, not if I'm a somebody who has several thousand Twitter followers, I'm not going to try and use my platform to target some 14-year-old kid and make him feel ashamed or so on. I'll try and deal with him sort of privately. And I think by opening up and making it public, one of the ways is solidarity is essential to combating this.
Yeah, one of the things that
I'm sorry, go ahead.
One of the things that I do is frequently I make it public when basically what I'm telling them is, I'm sorry, but you're really bad at this. And, you know, that pretty much ends it.
It's difficult to proportionally respond to any individual troll when you know that there's a good chance that that troll is actually 14. If you don't respond publicly to 50 people brigading your comments or, you know, tweeting at you, if you don't respond publicly, you don't get that support that Tauriq was asking for, but at the same time, you might be disproportionately shaming a 14-year-old who is literally just trying to get a triggering reaction from you, as Valerie was saying, running through the gamut of kike, Nazi, Jew, cunt, etc. Which, you know, they don't work together. How does that sequence of adjectives even... I don't know. So I don't know if there's an effective way to deal with the brigaders without necessarily putting undue stress on the 14-year-old, which there was an incident on Twitter very recently wherein a 14-year-old was effectively doing that Chan tactic to a feminist on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and she responded with MLK quotes, and it was just absolutely brilliant. By the end of it, he was like, I'm 14 and my mother died a year and a half ago, and it was pretty obvious that if that part was genuine, and you don't know, because everything else was disingenuous. I'm sorry?
The beautiful thing about that exchange was the part where he said to her, he said to Ujima, I'm 13 years old, so just chill out. And she said, well, sorry, I'm 14 years old, so just chill out. And she said, well, my son is 13 years old, and he would never do that to you. It was just like floored him. He also said that he must have an amazing mother, and she said, yes, he does.
That's the type of thing that you can have empathy for the people who are literally just trying to damage what you're saying with no reason behind it other than that they disagree. You can have that empathy if you have the resources to do it, though. You don't necessarily need to spend all of your resources fighting every single troll who is not genuinely trying to argue about the topic, though. I'm a big advocate for block and move on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I have a technique I used to fight phone harassment back in the day. You know, long before there was even Twitter. My mother pissed off a bunch of people, and whenever I went to visit her house, I would sometimes get the prank calls that she got from the hacker community. And I immediately I was studying English literature at the time. I picked up my textbook and I started reading them poetry. Oh, they hated that. Oh my God, they hated it. They hung up within like 30 seconds, right? And it's in that same vein of responding with Martin Luther King Jr. quotes. It's you're not taking them seriously, and they hate that. They're not getting any reward whatsoever. You're showing them that they're not affecting you. You're reading them freaking poetry, right? And that's enjoyable for yourself. Most of the time, though, I'm for the block and move on, and that's why I think things like Blockbot are crucial. And that's actually, I'd like to bring in probably a somewhat controversial topic that people may have multiple opinions on. The EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, recently finally addressed online harassment as a source of reduction of digital civil liberties. But their post basically said, and I'm oversimplifying here, but it said, don't try to use governments or the law to fight harassment. Don't try to use companies, you know, these large corporations, which are a product of capitalism, which are extremely effective and powerful. Don't try to use them either because they do stuff wrong. Everything has to be done by by loose coalitions of individuals who are not using the structures of corporation or the government in order to fight online harassment. And it had a bunch of stuff like fight hate speech with counter speech, right? And I'm just like, what level of speech is going to help someone who's having, disgusting packages and SWAT teams at her house, right? So I do think that it is. I couldn't use Twitter without the Blockbot or any of those similar things, but they're made by people in an unsustainable way without money, without a corporation, and I strongly disagree that with any idea that we shouldn't ask corporations to take a hand in fighting online harassment. So thoughts on the responsibility of Twitter to do more than just open up their API a little, which is a good start.
Well, obviously Twitter and Facebook and all of the social media platforms need to get behind these efforts. I have to
Jason,
make this our last...
Obviously, but it's not. Go ahead.
I have to make this our last round. We're coming up on the end of the panel, and there's not a lot of time. So if you want to make this the last thing that we comment on, then we'll close up. If you want to include plugs, by all means.
Go ahead, Miri.
I just want to say, for the record, I think there should really be more rigorous scientific research on this, on all aspects of it, on people who troll, people who get trolled, the sort of, like we were talking about, the social communities that arise from it, because I think that that'll do us a lot of good.
I will address the whole Twitter thing because, frankly, they claim to offer a service. What they're actually doing is setting up something where they want to sell me stuff. I mean, that's really what they're doing. They're a corporation. And frankly, they are using what I put on Twitter to sell other people's stuff. They are using what Black Twitter puts on Twitter to sell people stuff. They are using my work, my time, my image. They damn well better take care of us, or they won't have anything left.
Tauriq, anything to add?
Ban comment sections. Sort of the main thing I have to say.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Just the idea of banning comments, everything behind that idea of recognizing why that matters, I think will have repercussions elsewhere.
Why do you hate free speech, Tauriq?
Because I hate men so much, okay?
Val, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to come back to the concept of we have rules for how we have to behave, theoretically, that we have to be serious and take people at their word and all that kind of stuff. And I would love to promote the idea that actually, no, when it comes to people who are not acting in good faith, we don't actually owe them anything, and we get to mock them and make fun of them and not be serious as much as we want.
Okay, so with that, we're going to close the broadcast. Thank you all for coming.